I felt for you. That was that was tough. All right, this might be. Let's see. I don't know if Marshall is trying to get back on. And well, what do you think, Yuda? Should we start?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. So before we start officially, Alan, I want you. You had a very profound question the last time, which led to.
Wait, before we start, I hope everybody has some ability to write things down if they need to. Have near yourself some paper and a writing implement, because there might be a time where we'll just show you a bunch of things, and anything that comes to mind, just jot down. And I would say that would be something that we should just encourage each time that we get together.
So I'm not answering your question. Your question was, what's God's responsibility? Pretty much along those lines.
And on that, we went to sleep and never slept.
But people smarter than me have struggled with that question. And one of my favorite writers on the subject is Rabbi Harold Kushner, who is probably most famous for his book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. A very wise man. I've read a number of his books. And basically, in a nutshell, what he says in answer to your question is God doesn't cause the things that befall us, but God gives us the strength to go on, to put things in a context, find a way to move on. So his book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, was written years after their son died at a young age of a Jewish genetic disease. And it's kind of considered the classic on that subject. But that's his basic answer is that you don't look for God to do things for you. You look to God for strength to deal with the things that happen, because God doesn't make it their business to direct every action that happens down here on earth or over here or whatever. So that's a classic Jewish answer, which is a non-answer. My answer is, once the story of the eating of the forbidden fruit from the tree of good and bad, the responsibility shifted to us. So God is the causer of all the things. That was still kind of the waning days of that. We have those great stories, but Noah and the flood and things like that. But the trajectory was, I will give you the tools to deal with whatever happens, which is why the term, I'll bring it up each time, the term acts of God just really irritates me, because it can be used at will to, shirk responsibility or to whatever, cause fear, or avoid the responsibility of paying insurance, which is my favorite use of why your plane is late and they don't owe you anything, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So there was your non-answer.
Okay.
But that did lead us to want to tackle the subject of why all the questions? Why are we known as the people who never give an answer, just give another question and then keep questioning to a point of like, is there ever going to be a definitive answer? So here we go. That's the subject of today. All right, let me see. You have your story ready?
I do.
Okay. So Yuda's going to tell us a story. 1 minute. There we go. Why all the questions? That's the subject for today.
There's a
Okay.
wonderful, supposedly true story about a revered rabbi. A woman comes to him with a halachic question. And according to the story, the question was not a very sophisticated one. Indeed, the answer to it was very obvious. The rabbi told the woman he would research the question. He spent time going through tomes, taking out one scholarly book after another, and he then turned to the woman and provided her the answer. After she left, the rabbi's students who had observed the interaction asked the rabbi, Rav, why did you spend so much time on that question? And why did you check the volumes? You obviously knew the answer. It was easy. The Rav replied, yes, it was a simple matter that required no research, no thought. But if I did not accord the woman's question respect and give her my time and my research, she might never return to me with another question. And the next question might be a problematic one that would require time and research. Aren't you going to read that slide?
This slide?
The last one.
Oh, sure. An ignorant person cannot be pious, nor can a timid person learn. And that is from Pirkei Avot. This is often interpreted as, if you are too embarrassed to ask, you cannot truly learn. This is just an image to keep in mind, a little bit of an explanation. Probably the two best known debaters in our tradition are Hillel and Shammai. In many ways, they were seen as very opposite each other, but they handled debates in a way that always led to a feeling that both were right. The tradition, okay, so Hillel is remembered as a perennial opponent of Shammai. The Talmud records numerous disputes between the two men and later between their disciples. Although each school had a large number of followers, Jewish law almost always rules in accordance with Hillel or the house of Hillel. One of the most unusual tales in the Talmud explains how this came about. A heavenly voice declared, "The words of both schools, Hillel and Shammai, are the words of the living God. But the law follows the ruling of the school of Hillel, because the Hillelites were gentle and modest and studied both their own opinions and the opinions of the other school, and humbly mentioned the words of the other school before their own." Just a moment. Okay, sorry.
Yes,
It
that's
might
why it explains I never even heard of Shammai, really. I can't
it
even say
might
that.
be noted that Hillel was 60 years older than Shammai. So when Shammai started with his house of Shammai, Hillel was the elder.
He was known as Hillel the Elder, and he was quite a bit older than Shammai. According to the stories, they were very civil. Their schools later on, less so. But we like to remember the good. So when we talk about Hillel and Shammai, we talk about specifically about the fact that that's how they related, and that nevertheless, Hillel, because he considered, well, we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but he considered more than just the right or wrong or what was previously written, the strict interpretation. So he was generally considered to be the rabbis usually sided with his opinions for those reasons.
You might consider that the schools of Hillel and Shammai are still represented in our community today. Even though they're not labeled as such, there are those who go by the kind and generous and flexible approach, and there are those who are very, very strict. And of course, there are those in the middle too, but those represent the extremes I don't know that I would go so far as to say that Chabad is Shammai, but it's very close to it in the way they're strict. They do not ever have flexibility in the way they interpret things. And
Well, that Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. I wanted to include this in the discussion. This from the Women's Archive by a woman named Hannah Safrai, who did compile this research. Modern researchers argue for slightly different characteristics. Beit Hillel is more liberal and open to foreign influences of their time, which would have been maybe Persia, Rome. While Beit Shammai, the house of Shammai, rejects all foreign influences and focuses solely on Jewish tradition. Alternatively, Beit Hillel takes into account public opinion and customs, while Beit Shammai is guided solely by stringent formal halacha. Beit Shammai is more traditionalist, while Beit Hillel is innovative. Innovative, period. I meant to put a period there. And that's, I wanted to say that before, because I think what you're saying is referring more to this interpretation, which is a more modern interpretation of the differences between the two of them.
Just gonna go, no one said anything. Because it's funny, because for the very first slide, and when Yehuda was telling that story, why did he, go to all the trouble for the simple question? Because he didn't know what would come later. And the first word that came to my mind was humility. Because ever since I started looking at Musar, they say humility is the principal midot that you have to, because, and what can be more humble than, instead of talking in commands, always coming from the point of view, well, I may be wrong, so let me ask you this, and so I can see why maybe the people in this group, why we would maybe be, even if we lived back in that time, would be heading more towards the Hillel house in a public, in a public poll. But when you were talking about that description, where was that from? Because then in your description, the next slide, you mentioned humility specifically when you said why the house of Hillel tended to be
So
given more.
the first thing I read was from Jewish Literacy,
Oh.
Rabbi Joseph Telushkin's big book that
Oh.
answers lots of
That's why
questions.
he said, because Hillel showed humility and always listened carefully to opposing opinions. Basically, I'm trying
The
to.
Hillelites were gentle and modest and studied both their own opinions and the opinions of other schools, and humbly mentioned the words of the other school before their own.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yes, I'm thinking humility, and then you quoted humble. So yeah,
Of
I think
course,
that's a big key.
of course, that is a legal approach where you always start with the other person's thing so you can cut it down.
Well, that makes
I
me
never
think
was on the debate team in school, so some of this is beyond me, but I guess it.
I would say that one of the things that we note very clearly that just comes up in so many different ways, but the Jews are very unique in having created a 2,500-year history, basically of wisdom literature, where we write everything down. And the arguments of Hillel and Shammai are all written down. And it sort of creates the initial model for case law. And it's a fascinating thing that we're just so interested in writing things down. And we don't just write down majority opinions ever. We write down minority opinions as well. And because we don't know if over time thinking can change, and we want to preserve the thinking versus the side.
So I'm going to move to the next two slides. One moment, please. Okay. All right. So Hillel and Shammai.
Just funny, Shammai looks
Probably the
older in
most
that
famous.
picture.
Yeah, probably the most famous quote that's quoted out of Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers. It says, "Every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure." That term, dispute for the sake of heaven, machloket l'shem shamayim, we'll talk about that concept in a minute, will in the end will endure, but one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. And I'm just going to stop there because the rest of this slide is not relevant right now. Where I wanted it to bring us is to here. Arguments for the sake of heaven, as the rabbis put it. The goal was not to win or be right, but to discern the echoes of the divine voice from Mount Sinai down through the ages. In typical Jewish tradition and typical anything tradition, we take what we like of the quote and we, edit it to make it fit better. But the original quote, that's kind of what it implies. It also, the quote ends with a mention of the story of Korach and the rebellion of Korach. But I wanted to stop there because for our purposes for today, that when the term arguments for the sake of heaven is said, that it's usually implies a lot of things. And in American history, current history, it implies also that frivolous arguments there's something that they're improper, frivolous arguments. And I think, Craig, I'm going to stop the screen because I want to hear what Craig has to say. If you have something to say about frivolous lawsuits and how that might fit into this.
Well, first of all, I was thinking about Hillel and whether he was a bit of a lawyer, and he was, and that he was on the president of the Sanhedrin. And I just thought about that because of Yehuda and his initial story about, was it Rabbi Hillel who was approached by the woman, or a different rabbi?
The story is just written as the revered rabbi.
I was just wondering if he was doing it on a billable hour formula, and that's why it took a little time. I guess you're allowed to ask questions. In terms of frivolous lawsuits and frivolous arguments, they are sanctioned in courts of law. In the American civil justice system, the loser doesn't necessarily have to pay costs of the other side. But if your lawsuit was deemed frivolous, then you can be ordered to pay fees. So there are some arguments, I don't care if you're trying to be nice or whatever, that are just kind of beyond the pale. Not many. I mean, we could say all questions are good, but not all arguments are good. Some are just based on nonsense and need to be sanctioned if you are going to have an effective court system.
Nice.
I'm intrigued by that term, the expression, argument for the sake of heaven. First thing that comes to my mind is why. We're living here on this planet, or we're living with our feet on the ground. What is happening if there is a heaven, what's happening up there is not of our concern. So what's the point of arguing the points about that? It's kind of like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. How does that relate to our life on the ground?
So there's some of the weakness of translation. So if I were to translate that, I wouldn't use the term argument. I would use the term that comes from the word machloket, which is a division.
Division.
Right? So a divergence or a division. And what basically, it's a very complex saying, but it does not imply what we have given, the implication we've given to it, which is why I stopped the slide right there. This, for the sake of heaven, means trying to draw all the way back to what a heavenly argument would be. In other words, you can take that to interpret what would be a solution to a problem where nobody loses. That's sort of if you think about it, and heaven, Shemaim and heaven don't necessarily mean the same thing. If we want to look at the word Shemaim and we want to look at where it first came in the Torah, we can do a whole Torah study on it. But how it's become to be used is that way, that some things have greater meanings than humans can understand. But what's the point? Exactly to your point. The point is that when you being asked to make a decision that might affect somebody negatively, you have much more to consider. The what for of it is much deeper than who's right and who's wrong, right? So, and this, if you actually read some of the stories about Hillel, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, some of these things I am so not interested in. They feel like the kind of minutia that has given yeshiva boys a bad name. That you can spend an entire lifetime, and the rest of us want to say, just like you, what for? We're living here. Hello. This is right. So the translation is difficult, but I think what it indicates is that everybody is right, because what you believe is what you believe, and there's no one to say that you're not correct just because I don't think you are. But the implication is that, and we'll get into this in the second half, somebody ends up getting a raw deal, a bad deal, a dangerous deal. Something happens where somebody gets a negative outcome. And how do you deal with complex situations so that there's no negative outcome? Because we know what happens with negative outcomes. History tells us bad things will happen. And that's the sense in which we use that term, that if something is to be adjudicated or argued, it should be for that greater value rather than the immediate, expedience.
Okay.
Hey,
Could you
Barry.
do me a favor and put that quote up again, the exact quote, because I want to say so. The
Yes.
argument that is for the sake of heaven will endure. Is that what it
Yes.
was?
Yes. And again, the translate, let me, it's going to take me a minute. I got to stop talking because I'm not good at this. Yehuda, if you're talking, you're muted, so we can't hear you.
I'll give you an example of the kind of things that the two would argue about. They argued about how we should light the Hanukkah menorah. And one of them argued that we should light it from candle number 1 to candle number 8. And the other one argued we should light it with 8 candles and reduce to 1. And back and forth, they never came to agreement. What's come to be the halacha now is Hillel's approach, which is starting with 1 and ending with 8. But the argument's a legitimate conversation about why you do it, and with good thinking on both sides.
Okay.
The
And
reason
so if
I
we-
asked,
go ahead. Go ahead, Ruth Ellen.
Well, the reason I asked that, I wanted to see that again, is because it goes back to what is frivolous, what is not. Yehuda's point that we always include the dissenting opinions, basically, which brings it back around to Ellen, because in a paradoxical kind of way, that is what brings it back down to earth, because of the idea of time and things changing over time. So we can look at arguments. We could probably look at arguments in the pre-Civil War era of that survived, why slavery was a just thing, for example. I mean, I'm not a scholar in that, but I think that there'd be a lot of examples there, which then to be revisited, 150 years later, it's still a worthy question to endure, but a different outcome is going to be relevant at that time. So ultimately, it's not very satisfying, but to say that's why all the questions, because there's never going to be a definitive answer. No, I don't think. I think that's what we're here to get over expecting one, I guess, maybe.
It's sort of what I wrote in the introduction that was sent out in the initial flyer. The nature of asking questions all the time implies a type of humility that you do not know the answers, and that we're on a common search to come up with things that make sense. And there's a humility in not knowing, and a humility in basically exposing yourself and making yourself vulnerable by saying you don't know.
So for Barry's benefit, I'm going to run through the next two slides just to bring him up to where we are. And then I have to take the slides off so I can see people.
Actually, you need to move on.
That's Hillel and Shammai on the right. I know. Okay, so just a moment. I need to stop share. Okay, so again, back to that word machloket, which in Hebrew is division from the same root as divisiveness. And when that quote from Pirkei Avot ends with reminding of the story of Korach, that is one of the blatant examples of Korach challenged Moses and Aharon, says, "Who appointed you? Basically, why can't I be the high priest?" And, you know, it's a complicated story, but that's the reference at the end of it. However, the first part is what is usually quoted. And so that for leading our discussion, for moving our discussion on, that's what I wanted to focus on. Okay, so the general idea of being truth over triumph. And I have the slide up of, everybody recognize those two people?
And we're not seeing it yet, I think, are we?
Okay. It's, do I still have it up? No.
No, you don't.
And Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Right.
Scalia,
Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
who were friends, but were at opposite ideological ends.
Right.
Okay.
Just a moment. Let me get back to. Okay, so now we're, did you want me to run the next few slides for the, what is the nature of civil discourse, Yuda? Was that the?
No, the
Okay.
civil discourse was a function of this last discussion you had.
Okay. So I want to hear more people. I want to. What do you want? Speak up, Yuda. Do you want me to run the next slides? Okay. So I'm going to run a few slides, and this is where you might want, if anything strikes you, you might want to write it down, because that's going to be the next part of the conversation.
So this is what we're going to do. What we did is we
What?
it's very difficult while you're maneuvering there.
Well, this is how it is. So tell me when you want me to run the slides. No problem.
I do. Just do your part. It takes time for you to do it.
Do you want me to run the slides right now or not?
I said do your part.
Okay. It's cryptic, but I think I understand. One second. Okay. Okay, so we were here.
Mm-hmm.
Keep that in mind. This is the discussion we're going to have. And
We
here are
had-
a few food for thought. Yoda, did you want to speak about this?
I'm gonna read you little blurbs about the various, because part of what we've done when we put together the slideshow is show that within the Jewish community as well as internationally, people have thought about these questions a lot. So Edgar Bronfman was a Canadian American business magnate, a philanthropist, and a Jewish leader who transformed his family's Seagram Liquor Company into a global giant. He also was president of the WJO, the World Jewish Congress, and he also led major efforts to free the Soviet Jews and to promote Holocaust restitution to the survivors. A visionary businessman, he was a dedicated philanthropist, and he wrote two books, The Making of a Jew, that's very well known, and Hope Not Fear, A Path to Jewish Resistance.
Next slide.
Next, please. Read.
In Judaism, to be without questions is not a sign of faith, but a lack of depth.
Next.
Heschel, we are closer to God when we are asking questions than when we think we have the answers.
Now, Heschel was a Polish-American rabbi. He was a theologian and a philosopher. He was known for bridging Hasidic roots with modern thought. He became a leading voice for spiritual renewal, social justice, and interfaith dialogue. And he famously marched with Martin Luther King, influencing the Catholic-Jewish relations during Vatican II. And all the while, he taught at JTS and the conservative movement and wrote influential books like God in Search of Man, which is really famous, and The Sabbath.
Okay.
So then we ask the question, where does Jewish think?
Okay. I can't run back to it. Did you? Okay, I'll go back to it. I thought you could just read it off your thing there.
Keep the slides. You have a whole set of directions there. Why aren't you referencing
but
them?
just stop. Okay, the next slide is the next subject. So
Right, and I was reading it and moving forward.
you want me to do the next set? Okay. In my notes, that's the next subject, Yuda.
Right, and that's where we're at. That's where we're there.
Okay, so just a moment. Slideshow. Okay.
So we know that we have a long tradition of Jewish philosophy and Jewish thinking. So where does it fit in the greater world of world philosophy? So what we did is we did a deep search for where questions fit in the philosophical thoughts that have developed through the Western traditions in particular, but not to leave out the East as well. Next slide. Confucius. Confucius is a man who asks a question is a fool for a minute. The man who does not ask is a fool for life. He was one of the most influential philosophers of China. He was born son of a minor official during a period of time when China was plagued by wars and became a government official himself. He began to develop and teach a philosophy based on respect and order, now called Confucianism. He was China's most famous teacher. And I discovered, and he wrote 20 books called the Analects. And one quote from one of the books is, "Do not impose on others what you do not want others to impose on you." If you all recognize this, this is a variation of the Golden Rule, which was credited to Hillel 500 years later. So it got us thinking there must have been philosophical sharing during those periods of time, because where Israel was located was a crossroads. During this next set of slides, if you have anything that you want to talk about, we're going to stop after the famous philosophers, and you can talk about any of the ones you want in a brief conversation. Socrates. Socrates' questions are the beginning of wisdom. Socrates never told people what the answer was. He just kept asking people questions. The main ultimate philosophical questions that he asked were, who am I? Where am I from? And where was I going? And where am I going? And despite the fact that he wrote nothing himself, his ideas were preserved in his students, Plato, and then Plato's student, Aristotle. He was considered the first Western moral philosopher and a key figure in Western thought. Ultimately, he had to commit suicide because he threatened the empire. Plato, the right question is usually more important than the right answer. Now, Plato also, as a student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, he established the academy whereby they taught with a group of teachers teaching in Athens. They wrote influential dialogues that were actually written down. He explored ethics, politics, metaphysics, knowledge, and famously proposed the theory of forms, which is the ideal and unchanging realities. And he envisioned a just society led by philosopher kings, profoundly shaping Western thought. Isaac Newton. Millions saw the apple fall, but Newton was the one who asked why. Newton was considered possibly the greatest scientist that ever lived. He was self-taught. He created the three laws of motion, the laws of thermodynamics. He created calculus out of his own brain. And the mathematicians consider that the creation of calculus was the single most brilliant thing that was ever developed in mathematics. Voltaire, he must be very ignorant, for he answers every question he is asked. And that is something to think about. Voltaire was a writer, a philosopher, and a historian from the Enlightenment. Famous for advocacy of civil liberties, freedom of speech, and religious tolerance, he fiercely criticized the Catholic Church and French institutions through witty and satirical works like Candide. He shaped modern ideas on human rights and reason and championed separation of church and state. He challenged dogma and promoted rationalism, becoming a key figure of his era and influenced the French and American revolutions. So now, if any of you wrote anything down from these past philosophers that you would like to talk about, we can stop what we're doing and talk about those. And how they apply to Judaism, of course. Barry.
I studied Yiddish in college. I went to Columbia as an undergraduate, and the Yiddish course was offered at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And it was taught by Weinberg, who was one of the writers of the book that they used. And the book they used was called College Yiddish. And it taught Yiddish sequentially. You figured that first you had to know the alphabet and everything. So it describes the fact that in Yiddish, humor is very important. So they ask the very same question. You've all heard it before, but this was the first question, and it was written in a Yiddish textbook to help students of Yiddish, college-level Yiddish, learn the language. So the question was, "For was entweder jede Frage mit einer anderen Frage?" And the answer was, "For was nicht?"
Why does a Jew answer a question with another question?
Why
Why
not?
not?
This was in a college-level Yiddish textbook being taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary. So that's my answer.
Sense that I got from the philosophers that you selected was that answers aren't important at all. That asking the question is the most important thing. And that there's no such thing as a foolish question. But that the answers can be, they can be misleading, they can be false, but can a question be false, for instance? An answer certainly can be, but is there such a thing as a false question? It seems like having questions is more important than having answers, at least in those philosophers' views.
Maybe if it's a leading question. Right,
Objection, objection.
right.
I was thinking in terms of what does the Socratic method mean? And often my husband used to like to quote that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Each individual, as they're asking the questions, they're almost answering themselves. So the good teacher, and somebody like Socrates, and why that method is, I think, is revered now, is because it makes the person asking the question, and presumably the one who is more naive and more at, in intellectual distress, is forced to use their own powers of observation, examination, deduction, etc., to find the answer that works for them, So asking questions is obviously the opposite of spewing out dogma. So, I mean, I think ultimately what the Enlightenment says, and I think they got a lot of it, whether it was from Confucius before, the Jews, it was the wise people, it was the seekers, it was the ones who didn't get wrapped up, or in some cases, like when they talk about the Buddha, if they came from wealth and their material needs were taken care of, they were afforded the opportunity to sit there and ponder their navels, as they say. But I think, ultimately the goal is for each individual to be asking their own questions of themselves, but keeping in mind some of the things that were talked about, like the idea of the golden rule and all of that, so that as one is answering these questions for themselves, they are led to recognize that they're not solipsists either, that they're not the only ones of concern, and that they're not the only ones who have to find these answers in the world that we're living in. So,
Craig?
Yes, I did experience the Socratic method in law school, and I would say that the one purpose of it is to make it interesting. If somebody is a good practitioner of the Socratic method, it's highly entertaining and exciting because we all learn better when we are interested. I was interested to learn that Confucius and Socrates both lived around the same time, which was 500 BCE, a pretty long
Right.
time ago. So, and just in terms of the order of Hillel and Shammai, and Hillel being sort of more liberal and 60 years younger, and then Shammai comes along. You look at their background, Hillel was a laborer. He worked with wood. He came out of poverty. Shammai was more well off, described as a builder or developer, and he became more conservative.
Craig froze. I don't know if that happened for everybody.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I keep getting flashes across my screen that my internet is not stable, so I think it's not just him. Hey, Sarah made it. Hooray. Welcome home.
she looks like she's on the bus on her way home from the airport. She's because she said she was leaving today.
Okay, Sarah has something to teach us about commitment, but nevertheless, Yehuda, I want to hear what you have to say.
So Craig, I taught debate, and the class was a Socratic seminar. It was never anything but. The idea was that we create the learning environment where everybody participates and has the safety of being able to participate. And I think you're right. The kids were just so taken by it. Literally, I had to kick them out of class when the bell rang. They did not want to leave that class. It was the only class that they had in their academic careers that was very different than all the other classes. And I committed to the Socratic method. It was a wonderful way to teach. It really was.
I had to run to the bookshelf just to bring Barry a memory there.
Oh, I can't see it. Could anyone see it? Can you read what's on the
I'm
spine
just
there,
guessing it's
Alan?
a Yiddish. I'm just guessing it's a
College
Yiddish textbook.
Yiddish.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
College Yiddish.
Actually,
Are you going to fact check Barry?
Actually, in the forward is very interesting. It's got Amatana de alle was bei sehr Kinder in Moel hot Yiddish leben. It's a gift to all that in your children's mouths should be Yiddish should live. So
I'll bring my book in. I bought my book at the in YIVO in Manhattan, and it was, the room was so dank, and and the book was falling apart. It was totally wonderful tradition. It was great. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we are going to segue to the next section. All conversation can come back to what we're talking about, but there is a purpose to this, and we're going to segue to the next section. It'll take a minute. Okay. Show. Start. Okay. So actually, how do we answer questions as Jews? There's actually a formalized process. It's called responsa. Responsa is a written reply by a rabbi or Talmudic scholar to an inquiry of some matter of Jewish law, simple or complex.
So in this picture, that's a representation of a rabbi having to deal with a man who bought a chicken from the woman on the right, and the chicken won't lay eggs, and the rabbi has to deal with it. He's being asked by the two to solve this.
So I'm going to read something. It's funny, I put yellow highlights, but this light makes them disappear, so I'll do my best. Responsa addresses specific legal questions posed by individuals or communities. Often, the questions that these deciders are answering deal with novel challenges not anticipated by earlier generations. That's very important, not anticipated by earlier generations. Okay, and I will read more about responsa, but I did want to, okay, all right. The Geonim answered these questions in writing, grounding their rulings in Talmudic precedent while applying it to new circumstances. Their responses, sometimes terse, sometimes lengthy or discursive, were preserved and circulated, setting the foundation for a robust and evolving corpus. And I'm just going to jump to the end here. Today, responsa continues to be written by rabbis across the Jewish denominations. Many modern responsa are now published in print and online, making them more accessible to scholars and lay people alike. Some are collaborative, drawing on the expertise of specialists in medicine, science, or law. Others are participatory, inviting dialogue between rabbi and community. Responsa literature is both deeply traditional and profoundly adaptive, taking seriously both authoritative Jewish texts and the lived experiences of Jews. Whether studied for legal insight or historical research, Responsa offers a uniquely intimate view of how Jews have strived and continue to strive to live out their religious commitments in a changing world. And
So this is the way responsa were used back in the old country a number of generations ago. You lived in a particular shtetl or small little village. The person who was the rabbi was the person who the villagers trusted to answer responsa. It was plain and simple. The rabbi was the one who was considered to have given the wisest answers when an answer needed to be presented. However, you, as a person who sought an answer, had to commit to following what the rabbi said. So therefore, you did not do it lightly or easily, only if it was something that you were willing to do. It was not worth your while and not even considered acceptable that you shop responsa. You don't like what this rabbi says, you go to this rabbi. That was not what was part of the tradition at all. The responsa tradition goes back as many as 1700 years. It is a separate collection of writing. We were talking earlier about how we, the Jews, for 2,500 years have written stuff down. Responsa is one of those collections of writing that has been written down all this time. Wonderful examples in modern times that you can think of when responsa had to be decided. For example, the decision of the Reform movement to make women rabbis, or the decision of the Reform movement to go away from the matrilineal descent and allow that instead you were a Jew in the Reform movement, you were a Jew if you were raised Jewish versus if your mother was Jewish. During COVID times, how did we count minyan? Are we going to count here on Zoom? That had to be decided as a responsa, and when these responses are issued by the chachamim, by the smart ones that everybody trusted, that's how we move forward, and we have a body of this responsa that goes back. It's a fascinating thing.
Right. I think the emphasis I was trying to emphasize in my reading that the
Do you
term
want my, do I have my,
I'm going to, hi, Sarah.
oh, hi, no,
We-
all right. I'm sorry, I thought I was muted.
I'll mute you and you can unmute if you want to speak, okay?
Yes,
I think I was trying to emphasize the idea that traditional Jewish responsa accounts for the time we live in. And to me, that feels like the most important thing. I will say that the tradition of responsa is different among different denominations, so that you will see different answers to specific questions. For example, the question of whether, Zoom during COVID, you could count a minyan, but also specifically things like a implanted artificial valve, if it's a porcine valve, right? So sometimes across the denominations, they're able to come to an agreement, and sometimes each individual makes their own form of responsa, but this is an ongoing thing. It's never a once and done. I want to emphasize that the tradition of responsa is never once and done. It builds on the tradition, but it moves with the times. And that, I think, is probably the most significant thing to me, because the idea that you get stuck in a time and place, we know from the times we live in how complicated that can be. And so the tradition always was in the time, right? Going back to the sources, and the one argument about the difference between Hillel, the school of Hillel, and the school of Shammai, was that Shammai relied on things that were written and tended to lean into them without accounting for the time that they were living in.
So where does a person in modern times go? I mean, if you belong to a Hasidic sect, you go to your Rebbe.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Yeah.
But if you are not, but you're a member of a conservative or Reconstructionist congregation,
Yeah.
and you want to get responsa on something relevant, something important,
Yes.
are all of the quote significant responsa collected in one volume for each denomination?
Oh, each denomination, they don't necessarily use that term, but each denomination has like an ethical committee, for example, and that's where these things actually happen, and they are real. Let's just count the last few years and what things may have come up. Though the American Supreme Court decided on the legality of same-sex marriage, the Jewish denominations did not feel like automatically they were obligated to endorse, right? So each one, and some are still struggling with it. I will say, by the way, that in the conservative congregation, there's nothing that says you can't do it, but rabbis have to decide based on the ethical codes that their denomination sets out whether they can perform those marriages. So,
But how does a group decide which rabbi's opinions are worthy of being honored? Because if you have 3 Jews, you have 4 opinions.
And that's
Well,
very
did you
important.
read what Craig wrote? Because that throws in even more curveballs.
Okay, I'll read out what Craig wrote. Artificial intelligence has begun to reshape the responsa system primarily as an aid to to research retrieval and analysis, but mainstream rabbinic authorities have not accepted AI as a replacement for human deciders. Actually, I'm going to open that link so I can read it later, but I don't want to distract right now. There is a very short video that I will post. There are two videos I'm going to post. I promised everybody I'll post something general about like intro to Judaism, and then I'll post the same rabbi has a fun little thing that has that's argument, something about can a robot be human? Under what circumstances could a robot count as human? And it sounds humorous, but it goes according to the tradition of discussion. So Barry, I don't have exact answers to that question, but the tradition is that that's why denominations are important. And us being non-denominational means that when we've had questions that you have had to ask or I've had to ask, I choose who I ask.
Right.
On the other hand, Barry, if you're looking for that compendium, it's pretty obvious you would actually like ask the rabbinic assembly. That's part of what they do. They're the wisest ones. They're the ones who have studied the longest. They're the ones who are trusted by the greater community. I know when this thing of the change over to the reform movement, not just requiring matrilineal, I remember Gunther my uncle was visiting Israel, and we had this conversation about it, and he said, "Boy, it was a tug of war within the assembly." Because it was going to be a major change in how we interpret who's Jewish. And it's not accepted by the other movements, but in the Reform movement, it is accepted.
Right.
I mean, just the general, am I unmuted?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Just the general question, who is a Jew, opens up a whole another conversation. Just that general question, who is a Jew? Because down through history, things have changed so many times. Some Jews have been lost, other people have come in, grafted in, maybe there's intermarriage. So, except for a very few people, I think during the Babylonian Empire, correct me if I'm wrong, when the ark disappeared, a whole big chunk of genealogy was lost with the ark, from what I remember reading, and it's been some time ago. So correct me if I'm wrong, but so just that question, who is a Jew, is interesting in a long, genealogical way and down through history.
That
When
is-
I was in a Pardes yeshiva, I took a class in halacha. And one of the ways they taught this particular lesson was they had us read about this purple feather that was in a helmet and what you had to do with this purple feather in the helmet. And we read one thing after another through the ages of people, opining on this particular thing and to decide what was actually the rule or not. And the main thing that we came out of it was this principle of erecting a fence around the Torah. And I actually gave a drash on this years ago at KBS during one Shabbat. And the general idea being that we don't know what the Torah means. So therefore, the wisest people have said, well, we have to consider that the rules that might be in this section might be actually greater, and we're going to make the fence much larger. A great example is our milk with meat. It does not say milk with meat. But we don't know exactly what it means. The milk of the mother with the meat of the etc. We don't know what that means.
Boiling it in the child's.
So therefore, our way of doing that is to try and look at bigger pictures. And some of the responsa have to do the same exact thing, but they also have to create a body of work that can be trusted by the greater community, who will move forward with whatever the decisions are.
I want to just
Yeah.
attribute that everything I'm reading about responsa, or most of what I'm reading about responsa, came from my Jewish learning. But this particular paragraph, I didn't want to leave out. So, because the tradition is written, it sheds a light on history. So, from an anthropological perspective, responsa are revealing cultural artifacts. Because they are generated in response to real and timely questions, they preserve detail about everyday Jewish life that are often absent from other sources. Through responsa, scholars have gleaned insights into medieval trade networks, gender roles, medical practices, and many challenges of modernity.
And don't forget
Mm.
types of purple feathers.
Okay. All right. So,
I just,
oh, go ahead,
can I
Ricardo.
ask for, because you guys brought this up if I had one earlier. I'm just trying to get some of the logistics here, because when Yehuda talked about the history that it came from, it was a localized thing. So we're talking about a body of work of questions that have been cataloged to be used for later reference, perhaps. But was there also an idea of place? Like you said, you can't go shopping for the response you want. Well, most people couldn't go anywhere. This is why I'm saying, how has this changed in the modern era? We have the different denominations that we didn't have. I'm thinking back when it started in the shtetls, you know, then it was, I'm thinking like what you'd see in Fiddler on the Roof or whatever. I'm thinking that those scenes in Stissel where she goes to the rabbi because she says she can't live if she's not going to be able to bear a child, and they told her it would kill her, you know. And there were a couple episodes, who was shaking his head. It was
No,
actually
I'm
now that,
saying that's a great example, because
yeah,
in
was it?
Stishel, you
Yeah,
remember who's the father? Remember, it was the whole thing and how the rabbi worked. That was a responsa. You saw
it was,
right
even
then
though they didn't show it written down. That's,
he was
yeah,
formulating a responsa right there, because she thought, I can't have this baby because it would be a mamzer. But
mm.
the rabbi said, came up with a response which says, well, we don't actually know. And the way he thought it out, literally out loud, was a responsa for them to move forward with their lives.
But
Do
who,
we use do
you
we
said
use the
the
word
individual who asked the question has to accept the answer, like an arbitration.
right?
But when
Right.
it's used for historically now, I'm just trying to understand how this can be used to help us wrestle with questions in our own time. That's kind of what the whole main thing is about. So, but does it also bring it back to, well, it depends on what foundation you start with. And,
Yeah.
modern
Right.
time, are you going to go to the Orthodox? Are you going to go to the ones in Israel? Are you going to go to the American Assembly? Or, or are there kind of unofficial rules that you would respect the answers in, that's what I'm talking about, the space, in the location, in the milieu that you're in, not just in.
I mean, don't you migrate towards what you feel is true for you. So as far as the
Which in a way brings us
responsa,
back to the Socratic method, doesn't it?
well,
The
it
questions,
does, but the thing is, you know, it depends on if you want to be more inclusive or exclusive. Uh, and I think that's the bottom line. How inclusive does a group want to be? How exclusive? If you want to be exclusive, then you find uh, a rabbi or somebody that you respect that you think has the correct path, and you follow that person. If you want to be more inclusive, then you have a broader view of what the answers are to those questions.
I've always been under the impression that that responsa as a group of as a process was meant for serious issues of religious import. Most decisions that we make of every import, we make ourselves. And it's based on our life, whatever it is. Am I going to have raisins this morning, or am I going to have peaches this morning? We make those decisions ourselves. When it comes to a religious decision, the tradition in Judaism is to ask another Jew who knows more than you. And if there's a rabbi in your neighborhood, which there isn't for a lot of neighborhoods, then you can always ask the rabbi. You could
Yeah,
also,
so
and you could
Jerry,
also, well, let me finish. You could also go onto Google and you could ask Rabbi Google a question and say, according to Jewish thought. But the major, when we say responsa, to me, responsa is not for trivial one-time questions of the day, but it's for major issues that are concerned with worship or behaving as a religious person.
So that's
right.
where I put in the chat, it's about preserving Jewish tradition without harming the individual, right? So
I like that.
sometimes there is no one answer that only preserves Jewish tradition. Exceptions are made. There, things we're familiar with, the term pikuach nefesh duche Shabbat. All the things you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, you have to do if it will endanger your health.
Right.
That's a blanket. That's not even responsa. That is way, I mean, well, it is. It's actually so early on, I don't even know where it's attributed to. It's always been part of the saying about Shabbat.
Yeah, if you're on the way to shul on Shabbat and someone drops on the sidewalk in front of you and is in grave distress, you need to take care of them and not go to shul.
Right. And
Do you
that's,
want me to do you want me to do the next story, Abiba?
you can, so
No, but then the thing of it is that you have to have some faith in the rabbi or the person who is responding, that their response is the correct one. And after all, the saying, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth, and all the rest is commentary. I mean, there you go. So it's really who gets to make that the whether a rabbinic decision is, I mean, they're guidelines, right?
Well, we've
I,
already established who cannot make the decision,
That's
and
right. But
which
who,
is a Gentile. It appears that a Gentile can't make a responsa.
yeah,
And
we're
then,
just,
as I read about artificial intelligence, some say that's akin to a Gentile doing it, which I found interesting.
Mm.
I don't even know why we would consider AI. I mean, it's for information, it's fine, but why would we even consider AI
Because
as
it's super intelligent, it can
yeah,
synthesize
but
all the rabbinic commentaries in the world.
it
Why would you
doesn't,
not consider AI?
I'll tell you why, because it doesn't have a neshama.
That's
But if
true.
you're asking a question like, are locusts kosher? You can ask Google.
Yes, for information, but it doesn't have a neshama, and that's the
No, but
limit.
it'll say in the document a certain blend of locust is kosher.
Yeah,
That's
but
all.
we already know that. We don't need
All
AI
right,
to
so you
know
can
that.
ask.
Sarah, you're right. Sarah, you are correct. And what you said before is how I introduced it before, that the people who were always doing responsa in old times were the ones that you trusted.
Right.
And you didn't actually even do it unless you were willing to follow what they said. So
Yeah,
therefore, it put more import on the questioning process itself. So
exactly. And that's why we have Rashi and we have Maimonides and we
sure,
have all these other rabbis that,
sure.
yeah.
I have another story to read you all.
okay, we're going to run a little long, but this is all about storytelling. So,
Okay,
and then we'll run through a few slides that are just like food for thought. It's like 3 or 4 slides.
right.
So go ahead, Yuda.
A student went to his rabbi and said, all my life, I've heard so much about what we can learn from Talmud. I wish to study it and learn from you. So the rabbi looks the student up and down and he says, studying Talmud is not an ordinary feat. It is unlike anything you've ever been exposed to. It relies on a certain kind of question and answer. Let me ask you a few questions to see if you're ready. So then the rabbi holds up 2 fingers and he says, 2 men come down a chimney. One comes out with a clean face, and the other one comes out with a dirty face. Which one washes himself? The student, without missing a beat, says, well, obviously the dirty one. Then the rabbi says, well, I'm not so sure. Let me think about it. You say the dirty one washes himself, but the one with the dirty face would look at the one with the clean face and see how clean he is and assume he is also clean. The one with the clean face would look at the one with the dirty face and see how dirty he is and assume that he's dirty as well. So the clean one would go and wash himself. Now, before the student could respond, the rabbi again holds up two fingers. He asks, two men come down a chimney. One comes out with a clean face. The other one comes out with a dirty face. Which one washes himself? Just corrected me, said the student. It's the one with the clean face. It is, in fact, both, says the rabbi. The rabbi says the man with the dirty face looks at the man with the clean face and thinks his face is clean. And then the man with the clean face looks at the man with the dirty face and he thinks his face is dirty. But when the man with the dirty face sees that the man with the clean face washes his face, then he too washes his face as well. Now, the student feels tricked and dismayed when the rabbi once again holds up two fingers. The rabbi says, two men come down the chimney. One comes out with a clean face. The other one comes out with a dirty face. Which one washes himself? Oh, Rabbi, I am so sorry. I really don't know how to answer, said the student. I'm so confused. When I said the man with the dirty face washes, you said it was the man with the clean face. And then I was wrong again. And then you told me it was both of them and cleaned their faces. And I just don't know how to answer. The rabbi smiles and he says, that is what the Talmud wanted to teach you. You must ask a different question. Confused and scratching his head, the student asks, what different question? And the rabbi responds, the Talmud wants you to ask, how is it possible that two men both went down the same chimney at the same time, and one comes out with a clean and one comes out with a dirty face? When we teach you how to ask this kind of question, then we will study Talmud together.
Wow.
The guy who goes down first has the dirty face, and he wiped off all the schmutz from inside the chimney. And the second guy goes down a clean chimney.
Yeah.
My first question was, how could two of them fit down the chimney at the same time even? Like, how skinny were they?
Um,
I think that we just got was the definition or the difference between a wise man and a wise guy.
And this is how a Jew asks a question.
okay, just for fun, we're going to end with these slides, and then we can continue talking. Whoever.
Right. Now, once again,
wants to
if
stay on.
there's anything in these slides that you find is of interest, you can jot it down so you can talk about it in a sec. There are 4 or 5 slides now. So this particular slide is about Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein definitely compared in his intellect to someone like Isaac Newton. He was responsible for the theory of relativity, both special and general, photoelectric effects, E equals mc squared, Brownian motion, and unified field theory. But he also was a philanthropist, and he also won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921. He published groundbreaking papers on all these particular things, including quantum theory and mass energy equivalence. And when he escaped from the Nazis, he ended up serving as a professor of physics at Princeton University.
To raise new questions, new possibilities, to regard the old problems from a new angle requires creative imagination and marks real advance in science.
Elie Wiesel was a Romanian-born American writer, professor, and Nobel laureate, renowned for his Holocaust memoir, Night, and lifelong advocacy for human rights, peace, and memory. He was driven by his experiences as a survivor of Auschwitz and Buchenwald, where his mother, father, and younger sister perished. He was a devoted Jewish scholar, and he became a powerful voice against indifference, earning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986 for his work as a messenger to mankind, urging remembrance and action against persecution.
Questions unite people, answers divide them. He stressed that dialogue begins with shared questions, not easy answers.
Richard Bach, born in 1936 and still alive, is an American author and pilot who is famous for spiritual allegorical books like Jonathan Livingston Seagull and Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. He blended themes of self-discovery, freedom, and the illusion of limits with his lifelong passion for flight, selling millions of copies and inspiring readers with messages of spiritual growth and challenging reality.
You don't want a million answers as much as you want a few forever questions. The questions are diamonds you hold in the light. Study a lifetime and you see different colors from the same jewel.
And if I might insert, I think most of you remember Rabbi Nathan Siegel. His
Yes.
brother was Joseph Siegel. They were known as Joseph and Nathan, and they were both fond of Richard Bach. His book was Jonathan Livingston Seagull,
Right.
which is Joseph and Nathan. Jonathan are the living sons of Aaron Siegel. The
Oh.
father was a rabbi named Aaron Siegel. So Jonathan Livingston Seaguel,
So they were named after him, the book.
they were named after him.
Okay. Barbara Kingsolver, born in 1955, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning American author who is known for novels like The Bean Trees, The Poisonwood Bible, Animal Vegetable Miracle, and Demon Copperhead. She also writes short stories, essays, and poetry that blends science with social justice, environmentalism, and themes of family, community, and advocating for marginalized. A former science writer and ecologist with a strong Appalachian background, her fiction often explores complex cultural and ecological issues, earning her major awards like the Woman's Prize for Fiction and the National Humanities Medal.
You force people to stop asking questions, and before you know it, they have auctioned off the question mark or sold it for scrap. No boldness, no good ideas for fixing what's broken in the land. Because if you happen to mention it's broken, you are automatically disqualified.
Interesting.
Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. He was a British Orthodox rabbi, philosopher, theologian, and author who served as the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth. He became a global voice for faith, morality, and interfaith dialogue, known for bridging Judaism with modern society through his writings, broadcasts, and role as a life peer in the UK House of Lords. He advocated for spiritual values and a common good in a divided world, advocating for dialogue ethics and communal responsibility. In 2016, he won the Templeton Prize, an annual award granted to a living person in the estimation of the judges whose exemplary achievements advance philanthropic vision, harnessing the power of the sciences to explore the deepest questions of the universe and humankind's place and purpose within it. His legacy endures through his prolific writings, including commentaries, books like Morality, and his influential teachings on covenant, human dignity, and faith, which continue to inspire people of all backgrounds to live lives of meaning and purpose. And I might add that Aviva and I listen to Rabbi Sacks 2 to 3 Parshot drashes before Torah study every single week. He's the one who leads us into starting Torah study every single Saturday.
Judaism is God's perennial question mark against the condition of the world. Only one who asks whether the world should be as it is capable of changing what it is. All right. We only got a few minutes over.
So if anybody wants to talk about any of those particular things, we're welcome to have an open conversation about it. I think Barbara Kingsolver is definitely noting that we are at risk in the way our leaders sometimes attack people who question them.
Yeah.
The Elie Wiesel quote brought back a memory that I hadn't thought about in a long time, and I'd love to get everybody's perspective on this. Back in the 1980s, when a building had been selected for the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., he was there as part of the dedication, or at least the introduction of the building and what was going to be built there. And I was covering it as a reporter. And when I left to go back to the studio, I passed a car and I saw that was Elie Wiesel sitting in the car parked on the side of the
Oh,
street. So I went over to him and I said, "Do you mind if I ask you a few questions just to get some material for this piece that I'm writing?" And he nodded. And I said, "Why?" My first question to him was, "Why is it important to have this museum built? Why do we need this?" And he looked at me and he said, "How can you ask that question? It's a question that has there's no reason to ask that question because it's so self-evident." And it was, granted, it was probably not the best question I could have asked, but I didn't expect to be interviewing him, and I didn't know where to go. And I thought that's what I would need for my piece to get this distinguished philosopher, scholar, knowledgeable man's perspective on why a museum for the Holocaust should be built in Washington, D.C. But it shook me because I thought, first of all, he wasn't playing the game. I mean, when you ask a softball question like that, it's an opportunity for you to go where you want to go. But his point of view was this is a question that need not be asked.
interesting.
Mhm.
I have a few thoughts, surprise, surprise, but not just about this, because overreaching the whole thing. I love the way you guys brought in the notion of the other philosophers. And so I jotted a question here earlier. Is there any reason we should be distinguishing the way Jewish history questions from all humanity questioning? It's a subset, and we can
I
teach things
think
the way
not. I think not. But what I was trying to emphasize is we're the ones who wrote everything down and continue to. And that ends up having a weight of its own. And that
Oh, it's a
allows
rhetorical
us,
question.
it has a weight of its own. I mean, it led to case law for the legal scholars of the world, that we write everything down and that we have a reference therefore to go back to. It's not, when you say something like Socrates has nothing written down. So therefore, as much wisdom as he created a way of teaching, but we don't have any of the dialogues.
Yeah, that was partly rhetorical because I said I thought that, and then as we went along, I started thinking about other things that you all said that tied it together to the original question. Why are Jews always asking questions? Why is everyone always asking questions? Why do we not seem to get answers? And then Yehuda mentioned the notion that we can never really understand the Torah, right? We can't know what it means. So all we can do is keep asking questions over and over again. And then that brought me to the point of this is where faith comes in, because during that whole period where you're asking the questions over and over and over, yearning for a definitive answer, and it's not there. We live in temporal time. What do you do in the meantime? And some would say, yeah, that's why, follow the rules and walk humbly with your God. You'll find the answers by living what's being presented here. So what the Jews did probably better than anyone else is codify that in a way that's been sustained over time and space, throughout the world. But now so there again, is the role of faith versus trying to, rationalize in a relativistic way, which I find that when we start talking about all these little specific questions, whether it's the feather or the kosher or whatever, they almost all seem moot because they're such relatively minor discussions that people should not be, I shouldn't use the word should, should not be dividing themselves over, because there are much bigger questions vis-a-vis don't do unto others as you would not want them to do unto you, and so on and so forth. I'm sorry, I'm rambled on a little bit because it's just a lot here, but
And it's very late
However,
at night at your place.
however, that's true. That's true. However, the end game is to have a better world. And so you have to, so I think that the questions relate to that, and the way of living relates to that. So the rules, so to speak, the Torah, for what it is for its time, is Judaism is a way of living to make the world a better place. I mean, isn't that really the bottom line?
I agree.
Yeah, and
I,
that's why I guess my main point was the idea that you have to live it. You have to
But
live it.
but
Life
since
is
you
for
have
the
to,
living,
and as
but you
things
want to
change,
guide to how to live it best.
that's right. And as things change, Ruth Ellen, maybe the questions change.
Right.
I mean, the thing, for example, of ecology and what we're seeing happening to our world with fossil fuels, and some people are completely ignore it, and other people think it's important. So the questions have to somewhat change in order to be current. But I think the goal is the same. The goal is to make a better world, a world for the spirit, a world for Hashem. When we say to dwell in the world, that means to open up and make room for that goodness, give it a place to dwell.
so I want to just sum up what I think you're saying. Back into a quote that you weren't here. I don't think you were here yet when I read it, but the idea of arguments or discussions for the sake of heaven, which is the traditional machloket l'shem shamayim, as the rabbis put it, the goal was not to win or be right, but to discern the echoes of the divine voice from Mount Sinai down through the ages. Now, whatever you make of it individually, it's clear that it is not about one individual.
Mm.
The time at Sinai was considered the time that we made a covenant. We made a covenant to say, it took many, many years to write down what that covenant is. And me personally, I'm not even sure what it is, but it's clear to me what it is in my heart. It's not clear to me in words. It becomes clear the more you study. But the clarity is that it's not about you. You are not looking for a solution to a problem that will benefit you, because that would be the wrong reason to ask the question, right? Although
The
some,
revelation that took place at Sinai is very unique because it was a group of people basically that accepted this. It's very different than Islam and Christianity, where the revelation took place to one person in each case.
and they
Mm.
And
accepted it on behalf not only of all their people, but who? The ones not yet born and the ones no longer with us, like the entirety. And so that's pretty all encompassing. And I think that looking through in a religious perspective, I understand that. I don't know that I would come up with something like that on my own, but I understand what the meaning is, because all of that, what does it actually mean? You got your lifetime to figure it out. But what it means is not ever about just you alone. That's pretty clear in every way. Because last month, when we talked about the wording of the Vahavta, where it's compelling you to do certain things, but the reason you do certain things you individually is always about the plural, right? So you are compelled to do certain things, but they benefit the plural, everybody. And that's, I think, what the idea
Mm.
trying to understand here is.
Yeah.
you are breaking up off and on, Aviva.
I don't have very good internet. I'm sorry. I will just mute myself. If people want to keep talking, keep talking.
Well, but I think what you're saying is back to and you always go back to this community and building, starting from there to build a better world, which goes back to that end. What's our end goal? That's the question. That's a responsa. So maybe
We're
that's the
basically
last.
saying we can't find any end goal. It's all in the journey. Yeah, I mean, it almost brings tying it back to Newton and all that kind of stuff, because consolidating what we're saying and a lot of what Sarah was saying is that because the world and the energy fields and whatever is constantly changing, there's always going to be a different right answer at any one moment, which is why it's a perpetual
And a different question for that different answer.
sometimes, yeah.
Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe the questions are always the same and just take a different form.
You
I'm
know,
not
it's
sure
sort
about
of,
that.
it's sort of, there's a physics model that Einstein brought up, the whole idea of Brownian motion. And that it's similar to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle too, where there's so many different effects taking place in the greater universe that we cannot really track what things are. We can do approximations. In effect, we can create that bigger box, the box that tends around hurrah in this case, but in physics, it's the bigger box. We can predict that particle is going to be in this, but it's not here or here. It's somewhere in here.
Mm.
You either know where it is or you know how fast it's going. You can't know both or whatever. I know all these.
I think
Let's
I think the
complicate
idea
everything. Let's
I think the
complicate it
idea that
more.
the answer needs to be heard by someone or some group, as we talk about everyone being at Sinai, or the covenant was for those who are there, those who to come, and those who were here before. There was a short story that Isaac Asimov wrote in the 1950s called The Last Question. And in it, the computers had already, I think because in the 1950s, computers were new. And the scientists posed the question to the computer, can entropy be reversed? And the computer came back and said, insufficient data, cannot answer.
Oh,
And generations go by, and the computers get more powerful and more powerful. And pretty soon, the computers are building their own computers, and still no answer. Insufficient data, no answer. And then finally, after multiple generations, the master computer solved the question, had an answer, but looked around and there was nobody there to tell the answer. So
oh,
the last line in the story is, and the master computer said, "Let there be light."
oh! Wow,
Well,
that's deep.
that's the second, that's one of the laws of thermodynamics. And the research that I did when I was got my first master's degree, basically, there is a counter to entropy. Entropy basically said that everything, approaches randomness. But the counter to entropy is life, because life gets more and more organized as it develops. And it's completely the opposite of entropy.
Mm, good point.
That's right. But the point about that is it takes continuous input of energy to fight off that entropy. So, and also why we decay and are mortal. So, while we're in this earth, and while we're in this sphere, we have these dualities. We have the plus and minus. And that's what makes the most sense to me is to reconcile a spiritual sense of a greater consciousness that we call Hashem, and people call, whatever they want to call it, is that we overcome entropy by getting back to unity, where there's no plus and minus, where there's no relativism anymore. There's no, well, this is right if, and this is wrong if, but if you change the ifs, your assumptions, you'll get a different sense of what's the correct answer is, So, if I can figure out after I'm gone, if I figure it out and can get the message back to anybody else,
Let me know right away, please. Please.
This was a
Yeah.
very good session. Thank everybody for
It was.
coming.
I didn't know what exactly you had in mind when you said that.
We
And I
didn't
learned,
either.
I learned a lot about the history of the, with the Talmud and the responses. I've heard of that, but I never thought of that in terms of it being continued in a, in the modern era. I guess just because, what your mind attests to it, it will consider, but this is, I didn't
So
study
you're
it.
taking for granted that you're counted as minyan, even though you're on a Zoom screen.
And as a woman.
I'm
Right, and
going
as a
to
woman.
I'm going to update the list. Um, I'm not very good at this, but somehow I should be able to put everybody on one email list. And I'm going to post a video of, I think, Nell, I sent you already one video of this one rabbi from Texas who has an introduction to Judaism class that you can actually find on YouTube, because most of them are by subscription to synagogues. And in response to some people want that like introduction to Judaism standard thing, so I'll post that first video, and then anybody can from there see if they want to watch any of his other videos. But then for Craig especially, I'm going to post, I have to find it, but the one on dealing with some of the modern issues and how Judaism deals with them. I think you'll find it interesting. So look for that later after I eat dinner.